So it is the end of 2024, and I thought I'd hop on and make a video about what some of my predictions are for 2025. Hey, welcome to the show. Molly here. Today's going to do a little bit of a different show than I normally do, although I haven't been making a lot of videos. I do want to thank everybody who left very kind comments on the last one that I made. That was very appreciated. It was the one about the value of XRP needing to be high. So we are ending a year, as we do every year. 2024 has been quite a tumultuous year for me at a personal level. I went through a lot of changes, had a lot of adventures and experiences. It was a year I will remember forever, but kind of exciting to be at the end of that, because there was a lot of difficult things in that this year as well. To have a renewed start to try, to start over in some capacities in 2025 with a fresh outlook, kind of what the Japanese refer to as beginner's mind. Like, let's just wipe the slate clean and look at a lot of things from a new perspective. So I thought I would talk a little bit about some of the macro and financial predictions that I have. I wasn't sure if I was going to use the word prediction, to be honest, because I don't know if these things are going to happen as fact. I'm an analyst by trade, and one of the skills that you develop when you kind of connect dots is trying to make data-supported conclusions. Does that mean every conclusion is a fact? No. I mean, it's actually kind of a fun idea to debate, what actually is a fact. Is every fact really just someone's interpretation of some kind of information? But wanted to break down a couple of the things that I expect to see based on data and information I have observed and collected along the way. Some of the things that I expect to see in 2025. So the first thing I expect to see are regulations around stable coins and digital assets in the United States. I believe that these regulations have been written and are ready. It was just not the right time because there are a set of strategic reasons, in my opinion, why the United States has been held back in the cryptocurrency / digital assets / blockchain industry. This is part of the level playing field thesis that I've discussed publicly many times. I'm a big believer in it. And, when you look at how crypto is kind of a chaotic mess in the United States, we've had the SEC suing companies about rules that aren't very clear. I mean, I've covered the SEC Ripple case many, many times. And, the Rigged from the Start / XRP Unleashed documentary really gets into this battle over controlling the next payment rails, the next financial system, about how money moves globally. There's a couple different ways to look at the lack of regulations in the United States. Some could look at us having this sort of government that hates us, right? And they're trying to punish us and trying to kind of keep the incumbent banking system in power, where, if you understand kind of what banks are, they're not really that necessary in a world of advanced technology, in the same way that, the internet made things like bike messengers no longer necessary. That used to be a huge industry, especially in cities like Manhattan, where I lived, when bike messengers were a thing. When all of a sudden you could email documents, you really didn't need these sort of messengers to do things. And in the world of, DeFi, decentralized finance, where you can have these decentralized exchanges where computer code can essentially function as the middleman, you don't really need banks anymore. So there has been this belief that the banks are trying to hold back crypto from growing and taking off United States because it would kind of put them out of business more quickly. I don't disagree with that at a fundamental level, that the incumbent banking monopoly would love things to stay the way they are because they have a pretty good racket on things, right? And even David Schwartz has commented publicly about how the big banks are very slow to change, because why would they? What is their incentive to modernize an industry that has served them well? However, I don't think that is actually what has happened with crypto. And I'm using this sort of word, I don't really like the word crypto, but using that generally to talk about this whole digital assets blockchain sector. There's another thesis that is actually kind of coming from the complete opposite direction, that we have lived in this world where the issuers of the Federal Reserve note, commonly mistakenly referred to as the US dollar, have really had a lot of power in the world. Because since the 70s and the petrodollar agreement started, all global trade, because oil is such a big part of global trade, has been done in dollars. It has really put the dollar in a position of power. And the people who issue the dollar, actually the Federal Reserve note, have had a tremendous advantage. Basically, if all global trade is done in dollars, that means basically that's the currency for how, at a very macro level, the supply chain and commodities are bought and sold. If the people who issue the Federal Reserve note have the power to print those dollars out of nothing, but every other nation in the world has to work for their money. They have to drill oil or grow food or mine gold or manufacture widgets. They have everybody else has to work, but the issuers of the dollar get to just print money out of nothing. It's not fair. And then you add on to it the issuers of the dollar, actually the Federal Reserve note. I'm just going to use the word dollar because it's shorter. The issuers of the dollar also have the ability to enforce their political agenda on other countries. And they have a stronghold over the media. So they always kind of represent that agenda as being the moral high ground and the good one, and in the name of democracy. And, the United States is the good guys and they're fighting all these bad, evil tyrants in the rest of the world. That's not really always that's actually rarely the case. What happens is you have the people who are in charge of the dollar system, who have interests they want to protect. They're generally financial interests, and they use politics and the media to protect those interests. And they also use war and military to serve their interests. There's a great movie called The International with Clive Owen, I guess his name is. And there's a great scene in the middle of it where they're meeting with these sort of it's a very banker type meeting. I can't remember exactly who it is. But the point is Clive Owen is asking why this group is funding weapons to start wars. Is are they in the weapons business? And they're like, no, the real money is made in reconstruction and issuing these loans to rebuild things. So there's a lot of money to be made in conflict. And so the dollar system organizers they can print money out of nothing, and they can buy as much oil and food or whatever. They can manufacture as many weapons. And if anybody tries to disrupt that system, they label that leader as a tyrant or a despot or some other horrible label. And sometimes they just assassinated them, or they might start a war. And now all of a sudden people are displaced. It creates chaos. And then whoosh, you swoop in at the end and you rebuild looking like a hero and make a whole lot of money off the loans for reconstruction. We've already seen that that's going to happen in Ukraine, and we've certainly seen it happen. I mean, that's what the Marshall Plan was for World War II, after World War II. We've seen that happen in a lot of places. So that's my very long-winded, sorry, I went on a rant there for a bit. If countries in the world are tired of this system, and there's frustration. So back to the whole blockchain thing. We have seen with the internet that the United States has a culture of innovation. Many of the most brilliant inventors and designers of technology and creators of technology are American. And if the United States had been a very crypto-friendly environment from day one, this imbalance of the United States dominating would have perpetuated. And we probably would have ended up in a serious world war where every other country would be tired of the United States just dominating yet again. And the issuers of the dollar system, which is not me, I can't print dollars out of nothing, and don't support war in any capacity. So I'm not going to refer to this as we, meaning me. I'm just going to refer to the dollar system engineers and the issuers of the dollar. They had a racket going where they had a tremendous amount of power and control. And if we were going to try to avoid another world war, we need what's called a level playing field. And President Trump has spoken about this. I've discussed this at length with so many people the last couple of years. And I strongly believe that one of the reasons why XRP will be used in a global financial system is that it prevents any one nation or any one entity from having to be the issuer of the next world reserve currency. Part of it is because of the Triffin dilemma. which basically puts a creates a problem for countries that want to do a lot of exporting, which is Russia and China. They don't want their currencies to be so strong because they're the world reserve currency that other nations can't afford to buy their exports. So it's really not in the interest of Russia or China to be the issuer of the next world reserve currency. And nobody should want that anyway. We don't want to take one broken system and just give another country the power and the ability to do the same thing. So a level playing field would allow other countries of the world to be sovereign and issue their own currencies and have, their own kind of blockchain technology centers that will allow them to be prosperous. So my very long-winded way to get to my point, which is it's very possible that sort of the quote good guys have held back the United States from blockchain innovation via a very unclear regulatory system to give other nations of the world a chance to kind of get started. It's kind of like in golf, you have a handicap, so you don't let the best player, play against somebody who's just a less experienced player because it's just not really a fair thing. So if the United States is essentially being given this handicap of sorts, that would allow, this is why if you look at what Stellar has been doing globally, like they've been spending a lot of their grant money and efforts in Latin America and in Africa to help kind of those countries catch up from a technology perspective so that when the United States does issue regulations and it's clear to everyone here what you can do and how you can do it, I think there's going to be a massive wave of innovation, a lot of new companies starting. People are going to be really excited. And other countries in the world, and even centers like Dubai and Singapore that have kind of created these new blockchain centers, they can now compete because they kind of had a little bit of a head start in a good way, and it's a kind way. And we shouldn't, I'm very pro-American, I'm very loyal to my country, but I don't believe that like America should dominate every industry in every case just because. Like, that's not what being patriotic is about to me. So I would love other nations of the world to have a chance to be prosperous and successful and to have their citizens thrive and be happy and, live out their own personal dreams and wishes. And without a level playing field, that's difficult because we still do live in a global world where a lot of trade is done between nations. And so I'm not an isolationist by any means. I love to travel, and I would love to see more nations around the world have a shot at success, which was very difficult under the dollar system, which is essentially the dollar system was kind of a form of colonialism, where you had a very small group of people of European heritage who issued this reserve currency and were able to basically buy resources for nothing and then turn around and make money off of all those things. So one of the things that I'm going to be doing for myself and for Valhill for most of January and February is really breaking down what this level playing field would look like in Africa specifically. If you watch my last video, I'm very fired up about the CFA franc and the 14 countries in West Central Africa that have to use this currency that is issued by France, and it's not for their best interests at all. They have to put up 50% of the currency issued as reserves, which means the French central bank can make money off those resources for nothing. So, and there's also, if you look back, I've spent a lot of time over the Christmas break reading kind of books about the history of Africa, and if you look at how colonialism kind of morphed into this race to kind of control the commodities resources industry, mostly oil and gold, uranium, cobalt, and that type of thing. None of these policies or things like foreign aid ever end up serving like the African people. There's like the Western mining companies and the Western commodities brokers do very well. The elites in Africa, who are a very small percentage, do very well. And most of the people who live in these resource-rich countries end up barely surviving. Their life expectancy is very short. There's a lot of disease, horrible malnutrition. And they call it the resource curse. Like, a country like the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is absolutely huge country full of resources. And the vast, vast majority of people live in absolute poverty. And it doesn't make any sense. You're like, there's all this money, there's all this wealth coming out of the ground. it's being mined and drilled and whatever, where is all that money going? That's a great question. And even more important, like, how can those systems be changed so that the people of Africa can actually benefit instead of being, taken advantage of like they have been for hundreds of years. Anyway, that's a complicated topic. I'm going to have a whole video series and a book about that. So stay tuned starting in the next couple of weeks. All right, back to my predictions for 2025. I do think that we're going to see some changes in this level playing field regard. One of the aspects of that is to move the world away from these fiat currencies towards asset-backed currencies that is sometimes referred to as the gold standard, but I do believe at a personal level, more than just gold will be used to back sovereign currencies. Because it's, again, level playing field means everybody's got to have a fair shot. So if you're a country that happens to have a lot of gold in the ground, that's awesome, but you shouldn't be at an inherent disadvantage if you happen to have a lot of silver or some other resource or some other asset that you want to leverage to back your currency. I don't think it's fair to the world to only have gold be the backer of currencies. The point of having an asset-backed currency is to prevent the central bank or the governments from just printing it out of nothing, because you want it to, there has to be a way to manage the supply in a responsible manner. And it's a lot of work to dig up gold, and you can't just print gold out of nothing. So that's, I do think we're going to see a shift globally to sovereign asset-backed currencies. They will probably be digital currencies, although some may issue cash as well. We've already seen that several republics in the United States, I know of Florida, Tennessee, and Texas, that are already talking about asset-backed currencies at the state level. Now in the United States, Constitution refers to silver and gold as being money, so we may just see those assets here, but that doesn't mean that's the way it has to be everywhere. That's going to be exciting. It's possible we already have a gold-backed dollar. I don't know. I don't know how we're going to know necessarily unless someone just tells us, but I do think there is a lot more gold in the world than has been publicly reported, and I think the United States has a lot more gold than we think. I also think states have been stockpiling gold. I know central banks have been stockpiling gold. They've reported it because they have to via their disclosures. So there's tons of articles that have been written over the last 10 years about that. So that's my second prediction, that we're going to see a shift at a more significant way towards gold-backed or asset-backed currencies. I also think we're going to see a currency reevaluation. This is, people who love to talk about the dinar or the dong refer to a kind of wake up one day and those currencies will be massively revalued. And those countries were chosen because this, dollar system that likes to start wars that I mentioned a little while ago went into those countries and just destroyed them. So Vietnam was obviously destroyed back in the sort of late 60s, early 70s. And, Iraq in the earlier part of this century with the Iraq war after 9/11. The citizens of those countries had nothing to do with either of those conflicts, and their economies and consequently their currencies were destroyed. And so part of this level playing field thesis is to try to, help those countries that were so damaged kind of catch up so that everybody has a shot at participating in this global economy, in it fairly. So people have been buying those currencies with the hope and expectation that there would be a major revaluation. And you know what? By the time you watch this video, it may have already happened. I have some friends that are in the Forex, foreign currency world. They know more about this topic than I do, who are very confident that it is imminent. But I gave up trying to do the whole dates thing a couple of years ago when that all started for me. So I don't know. Now I have a wait and see approach, but I do think that it probably will happen in the next soon. I don't know when. And then that kind of ties into when do we expect to see like a flip the switch for the financial systems. This is another topic I like to discuss, because if you think about all the things that would have to flip the switch at the same moment, it's kind of a daunting idea that like the entire financial system would sort of move from one thing to another at once. Well, we did see with COVID that like coordinated things can happen. Like the world shut down on like a particular day, and it was as amazing just at a coordination level to see how that actually happened. So for me, with the flip the switch for the financial system, I do think that certain markets, like the stock market, you can't have the same stock being sold in two places, right? So you kind of have to flip the switch on something like NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, because how are you can't have sort of two settlement mechanisms. You can't have two back end things, back office, whatever's going on. And the stock has to trade like in a manner where all that inventory is kind of in the same place. Now, I don't know enough about how those markets work on the back end. It just seems illogical to me that you could have the same sets of stocks being run in two places. And if you split it and like half the stocks were in one old market and half were in the new, people would wake up to that because they would see like the amount of supply drastically change. So this is why I believe for a long time that the capital markets, the big ones that have exchanges like NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange, will have to switch at a certain time. And it's been believed that would happen over a long weekend where there's a holiday. It will give them a little bit of extra time, but I don't know. Every holiday weekend since I've had that theory, we've watched it with bated breath, and every holiday weekend has come and gone and it hasn't happened. So I do think it will happen this year. Whether it happens on a holiday weekend, maybe, maybe not, I'm not sure. But I don't see how you could have a market run on kind of a blockchain-based digital asset settlement system and sort of the old school way at the same time. So you're going to have to flip the switch on that. And why not flip the switch on all of them all at once? We do know that the DTCC, who is the owner of those markets, like is very heavily invested in digital assets. So it makes a lot of sense to, as you want to move to this world where you can settle on those transactions very, very quickly, to move to the blockchain. And I think that we're going to see that this year. And when all those things happen, this is where I would expect assets like XRP and XLM to increase materially in value, as now those systems will be used. One thing that I find frustrating is when major news comes out about something like XRP and the price doesn't change and people get all mad and they're like, oh, so, Ripple's doing something, or, someone announced they're going to use XRP, the Japanese banking system is going to use XRP. Why hasn't the price gone up? I'm like, you don't understand why XRP is so different than these other assets. It's not a stock that should go up in value based on hype. I've covered this many times, this concept of the virtuous cycle where you have two competing forces. One is utility, which for XRP would be being used as a bridge currency to support large transactions. And then simultaneously, people are going to need to store their wealth somewhere. And so if they see this asset going up in value because it's being used for transactions, they're like, well, hey, I got to store it somewhere. The dollar system's collapsing. Might as well store it in XRP. That creates this thing called the virtuous cycle, which are two competing forces simultaneously driving up the value. I have videos on that if you want to check it out. If you want to read the XRP valuation white paper that we wrote last year, this topic is covered in there as well. And that's pinned on my Twitter profile, X profile. All right, so let me see. I had a little list here. All my predictions. I think we're going to see a flip the switch for the capital markets. In this case, I'm specifically referring to the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. I don't follow enough of the global capital markets like the FTSE in London or Singapore or whatever to speak about how that will happen. But I expect that once the major Western markets switch, everybody's going to have to, you can't have half the people on one and half the people on the other. I mean, this is where game theory kicks in. You get a couple of the people, the dominoes to fall, and then everybody's got to switch it. All right, I think we're going to see a gold standard, which is a euphemism for an asset-backed currency world where assets of value are used to back sovereign currencies. I also think we might see republic currencies like state currencies, because if gold is money, does it really matter if I have a Texas dollar or a US dollar? I don't know. It's a great question. But I think we're going to see, and we already know that that some of those states have issued press releases that they're planning to issue their own republic currencies for purposes of trade and stable, non-inflationary currencies. All right, I think we're going to see regulations in the US. I think they've been ready for a long time. Same way I thought that, it's pretty clear the Patriot Act was written well in advance of 9/11. There's no way that gargantuan of a document could have been written that quickly. So I think the banking regulations for crypto and digital assets are ready. They're just waiting for the right time to introduce them, partly because of this level playing field thesis that I mentioned in the beginning. It might not be this horrible thing to punish the United States. It may be a way to give other countries around the world an opportunity to catch up so that we have this level playing field and it's a more fair system because it's been rigged for a long time. I think we're going to see currency revaluation, specifically with the dong and dinar, but This is something I've chatted about with Jimmy a long time ago, is like we might end up see parity on every currency where every one is a one-to-one exchange. Uh, and that would mean that whole like Forex world as we know it kind of goes away. And if every country had a gold-backed currency, let's just say, for example, and so one unit of American currency is equal to one unit of you know, Australian currency, which is equal to one unit of a Burkina Faso currency, like then there isn't this arbitrage or rigging of a system of reserve currencies and who's got this power and we got to hold this guy's currency and we're going to devalue your currency as like a political weapon. There's all these games that go on with currency wars. Jim Rickards has covered this in his books at length. And so that kind of goes away if we have a system where everything is one to one to one. And for those who don't think that's possible, go look up the Plaza Accords from the 80s. It absolutely is possible. Governments can sit down and make these agreements. That's what the Bretton Woods agreements were. They sat down and decided the dollar was going to be the world reserve currency. And that was when a lot of these African nations were also, their financial planning was done well and their monetary systems and the CFA franc systems were created. So I think it'll be exciting to watch all of that unfold this year. And when you're looking for it, and now you see news articles come out that refer to these revaluations, don't be so quick to like worry. Like a lot of this stuff I think is being done for the betterment of humanity. And even if something maybe looks like it's giving another country an advantage and not your country, just know that like no World War III will be to everyone's advantage. So if it means that you might have to cede profit on something or cede domination in a particular category for the betterment of the world so we don't have to watch more people die needlessly in stupid wars, then that's best for all of us. So, all right, those are my predictions. I'll be back soon with the beginning of my level playing field for Africa stuff. It's fascinating to see, the United States was a colony too, right? It's interesting when you talk about whether or not the United States was truly liberated from Britain or the UK, because there's a lot of systems that were left in place to ensure that the City of London had a lot of authority. And you could argue, many do, that the City of London, is an owner of the Federal Reserve, which means they are an owner of the issuer of the world reserve currency, which means they get to go and buy stuff with money they print out of nothing for free and everybody else has to work. And it's a rigged system. And what was done in Africa is despicable because Africa is full of resources. And I'm even just going to talk about the like mineral resources for now. Let's leave even the darker side of that resource discussion for another day so I don't get kicked off YouTube. But the same sort of system of colonialism was in place in Africa, obviously, but then a lot of these countries were, quote, liberated back in the 50s and 60s. They were liberated sometimes kind of in name only. Like it's not really clear who owns those corporations now because all countries are set up as corporations. Who, in the case of the CFA franc countries, it was pretty clear France was like, all right, we'll let you pretend to be free and you can have your own elections and your own people as leaders, but we're still going to control the money system. And there's a great Rothschild quote from hundreds of years ago where he says, like, I care not who the leader of a country is as long as I control the money supply, because you realize that when you control the money supply of a country, you have a tremendous amount of power. And if you also control foreign policy and how, what kind of deals have to be done, these countries in Africa may not be as liberated as we might think. So let's sort of figure out, all right, how can we kick the rest of the colonizers out? Let's do it. Because I'm not a fan of rigged systems or colonization at all, because it generally just screws over the people and lays a very small percentage to profit while doing harm to others. So I'll be back soon with some more videos on that. And all right, I wish you all a happy new year and hope you're doing well. And I'll see you in the next one.